Hello, everybody, and thank you very much all for attending this Gaza Tribunal Report presentation this afternoon. I'm Jeremy Corbyn, MP for Islington North and founder of the Peace and Justice Project, which established this whole Gaza Tribunal system that goes with it. First up, I want to say an enormous thank you, first of all, to the South Place Ethical Society for letting us use this room today. It's so appropriate. It's on the Brockway in memory of the Great Peace Campaign. I also want to say an enormous thank you to all of the team at the Peace and Justice Project, Martin, Sam, Sinead, Lau and Carrie for the work that they put into making sure this happened. Big thank you to Ollie Rose, who works for me, doing media work for me in Parliament. And obviously enormous thanks to Matthew and Mercedes for the research work they've done on this, and I'm sure by co-conspirators here it wouldn't have been possible without them, so thank you very much. It's been a huge amount of work to do this, but I felt it's something that's very important. And as the news comes out of Gaza day in, day out of the horror of what's happening, I think this is more appropriate than ever. Last July, I proposed in Parliament the Private Members Bill, which I have a copy of here, the Gaza Independent Public Inquiry Bill. That was blocked by the government. I was expecting them to do that. But in return, we decided to set up this as our own tribunal of inquiry. And I want to say an enormous thank you to Shard and Ned for the huge amount of work they put into this, and what a pleasure it's been to get to know them and work with them on this. They're incredibly diligent, brilliant academics, and their work should be lauded and recognised for the achievement it is. It's hard to summarise the tribunal in just a few words, but there are just some of the stuff that we heard during the tribunal. It's deeply moving. Dr. Nick Maynard and Dr. Victoria Rose giving us their accounts of working in hospitals with limited equipment, limited anaesthetic, not even proper antiseptics, but they managed somehow to do the work they wanted to do. Shocking was the testimony from Mark Smith, the British Foreign Office, who indicated what the atmosphere and the culture was like in the Foreign Office and the way he was put under huge pressure. Matt Kennard's work in analysing the flight data from marine material has not just been crucial to the work that we've been doing, but so many others as well. Essentially, the conclusions are the British government is complicit in genocide. In some areas, it's gone over the line into active participation in that. Summary, and you'll get a fair idea of what's going on. So then we come on to the recommendations. We want to work with the ICC to draw their attention to evidence presented in this report, and we will obviously be furnishing a full copy to them, of criminal complicity implicating individual government ministers and officials, and the continuation of the economic ties with Israel, as well as the commissioning of arms trade, arms transfers, and intelligence exchange. So we think the government should cooperate with a full, official, independent public inquiry into any cooperation between the UK and Israel, particularly since October 2023. And I will continue to push that in Parliament, as I know my colleagues will. I'm joined by my good friend Iqbal Mohammed here this afternoon, MP for Batley and Dewsbury, and Richard Bergen, who gave evidence to the tribunal, very powerful evidence, messaged me this morning that he's unfortunately involved in a rail incident today, a strike action being taken in Leeds, and he couldn't be here, but he wanted to send his support and his apologies. And so that's the process that we're taking forward. The executive summary covers it all, really. People are still living in tents in Gaza with no running water, no electricity, and surrounded by sewage. Just think about that. That's gone on since October 23. People still living in tents with raw sewage running past them, and children having nowhere to go but to play in sewage-infested water when there's any heavy rain. It is unbelievably disgusting. 20,000 of the 71,000 dead are children. The long-term effects on them, their mental health and their
physical well-being will be enormous and will be intergenerational. Additionally, those that bravely tried to report on Gaza, 250 journalists at least, have been killed, and many others subjected to harassment, and I have to say, in some cases, professional marginalization. And I have to say that some of the news gathering organizations have abandoned the people that they use to get the stories from. And so that is another aspect of the horrors of this war. And the shortage of food. This Gaza siege has weaponized food, which is, of course, a war crime in itself, and deprived the population of the basic things to survive. So there are many things in this, but I'll just conclude with this. We want an immediate suspension of arms transfers. We want a suspension of intelligence sharing with Israel. We want measures to ensure non-recognition and non-assistance in respect of Israel's unlawful presence of the OPT, including a review of existing trade and investment relations. Support, obviously, for humanitarian relief, and full cooperation with international accountability, including the ICC and the relevant UN special rapporteurs. Britain is not the biggest arms contributor to Israel, that we well know. But Britain is a crucial part of it because of the RAF base in Akrotiri, because of the sharing of intelligence information, and because of the way that the US has significant military presence in Britain. And this has all assisted this. And so we want more information about what the RAF have actually been doing. This whole process has eroded Britain's standing in the world, eroded Britain's commitment to international law, to the UN, to human rights, to international justice through the ICJ and the ICC. I was in Parliament when we signed up to the ICC, when we joined the ICC as a founder state member of it. That was, I think, a good day in Parliament. We now find ourselves as a country wanting in front of international law because of our complicity in what I believe to be war crimes that have gone on that have so affected the Palestinian people. So there are many demands we'll make on the British government, all of which are summarised in this report. And I'd be grateful if you can to read it in detail and learn from it. And we in turn will learn from the responses we get, because this isn't the last word on the subject. It's not the first, but it's an important milestone in it. So I want to say again, an enormous thank you to all those people that gave so much effort and time into ensuring that the Gaza Tribunal actually happened. And that's what the Peace and Justice Project exists for, to make sure we shine a light into those places where the powerful do not want the lights to be shone. Thank you very much, all of you, for coming. I now pass over to you first to give your analysis, then go on to Chad. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for that, Jeremy. So it is clear that we are at a historical crossroads. We've crossed a red line of genocide. We've crossed a line that humanity has promised itself it will not go at. All the lessons learned tell us that this is indeed the time to act. Let's think about this for a second. When someone commits an act of murder, the sanctity of human life in front of their eyes goes away. Something in their humanity dies at the act of taking life from someone else. That is why we as humanity have put forward systems of accountability to ask to stop that. That is the red line that we put together as societies. Now imagine what happens to one's psyche when they have directly signed orders, knowingly acknowledging that not only are they distorting their reality on the ground, but contributing to it. What happens to one's psyche after knowing that their acts directly led to shredded bodies of children hanging from buildings, to parents holding the parts of their children in plastic bags, to a whole population starving at the brink of famine? What happens to someone's psyche when they know that they contributed to that and yet they go unaccountable? Humanity has crossed that threshold. We've crossed the threshold where it's all right to open the news and look at that and say that this is normal. And the biggest evidence we have for that is that today, as we speak at this moment, the same crimes happen in Lebanon, in Iran, they continue in the West Bank, they continue in Gaza. And if this irresponsible behavior goes without accountability, we will see a region that has lived for 5 generations in war go ablaze once again. That is the level of depravity that we are speaking about in this report. In our hands, we have evidence that British officials knowingly hid the truth and distorted the truth. They had the legal advice and chose to overlook it. British citizens with good consciousness who sought to uphold their legal and moral obligations of standing up against power were threatened with their livelihoods and asked to either quit their jobs or shut the hell up. People who went to the streets with a clear consciousness to say that Britain has to abide by its international obligations. They said nothing more than that. Not to aid and abet a genocide, not to recognize its illegalities, not to make the claim that British interests exist all the way up in someone else's land. That is not British land, that is not British interest, and British taxpayer money should have never had anything to do with it. And I go back to saying a red line has been crossed. The testimonies that we heard throughout the 2 days of the tribunal shake one's consciousness. We got a full image of how is it that British complicity was sown with people who knew completely what they were doing. And it is today that we come together and say, what is it if those officials were not held accountable for the decisions that they made? If there is anything that humanity should be proud of, it is that we have legal systems. It is that we stop to say no to genocide, no to murder, yes to equality. That is the legacy of humanity that we believe should be upheld. And these are the values that today we stand up against, we stand up for. As we speak, British bases are yet again being used as a launch pad for military warplanes that will go and drop bombs on civilians and on people in conflict in somewhere where England should have never been to begin with. The core root of the problem started with the British normalization of a settler colonial project in Palestine, and the same thing happens today with British colonization having normalized abdicating Iranian right of self-determination by protecting the interests of BP halfway across the world. The story starts with Britain there, and the story started with Britain and Palestine, and the same story repeats itself. Today, we come with the message of accountability, but we also come to the message that we need to be more aware. We need to keep up. And it's also the time when the British public needs to be as mobilized as possible, where we stand hand in hand to say no to war, no to intervention in wars, and also upholding the international legal system that has died in Gaza. Today we are talking about its resurrection. Today we are talking about rebuilding it by taking people's power through people's tribunals, and to say that this is the standard that we will uphold humanity to. A standard of equality and a standard of rejection of crossing that red line where human life is no longer sacred. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
For 2 days, we heard wrenching testimonies of courageous witnesses. And today we gather to highlight, condemn, and call for an investigation of the UK government's complicity with Israel's genocide in Gaza. We have gathered here after the killing of close to 5,000 Palestinians, among them 20,000 children, and an untold number still lying under the rubbles waiting to be properly buried. We gather here today after more than 80% of Gaza's built environment has been destroyed. 97% of schools have been damaged or destroyed. all 36 hospitals, and every single university, and after Israel has rendered 95% of Gaza's arable land unusable. We gather here today after 1.9 million people were displaced, some of them multiple times, while at this very moment, as Jeremy noted, there's about 1 million Palestinians living in squalid tents without electricity, running water, or a sewage system. These testimonies we have heard clearly indicate that the British government has failed its fundamental obligation to prevent genocide and has been complicit in a series of atrocity crimes. But as we gather here today to highlight, condemn, and demand an internal investigation into the government's complicity in these crimes, the Gaza doctrine of destruction, displacement, and death is being extended to other parts in the Middle East. Within 2 weeks of an illegal war launched in the middle of negotiations over a nuclear deal, the US and Israel have damaged or destroyed over 20,000 civilian buildings in Iran, including schools, hospitals, and cultural landmarks, and displaced 4 million people, 3.2 in Iran and 800,000 in Lebanon, and this does not include the 1.9 people in Gaza. We're talking about 6 million displaced people. The death toll in Iran is already in the thousands and the injured in the tens of thousands. Critics have charged that Israel is now extending the Gaza doctrine to Lebanon. Surprisingly or not, Israel has embraced this accusation, dropping leaflets on Beirut depicting Gaza as a success story and threatening Gaza-scale devastation in Lebanon. And once again, the UK government appears to be on the wrong side of history, providing air and other kinds of support to the criminals who flagrantly violate international law, rather than upholding the norms, obliging warring parties to protect civilians in civilian sites. The events of the past 2 weeks underscore a simple truism. Without accountability, without ensuring that government ministers and officials assume responsibility for the crimes they have facilitated, the same or similar crimes will continue to be committed. We are therefore committed to working with the domestic and international institutions, including the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, to draw their attention to the evidence presented to the tribunal, particularly evidence that the UK has failed to prevent genocide and of its criminal complicity in grave violations of international law. This includes evidence implicating government ministers and officials. At the same time, we call on the UK government to end all arms and surveillance technology exports, surveillance flights and intelligence exchange, as well as training and security cooperation in Israel. We further call on the government to impose a ban on all settlement products and services and to review all public contracts to prevent public institutions and funds from supporting Israel's illegal occupation. We call on Keir Starmer to issue widespread sanctions against senior members of the Israeli government and military and ensure that the Scotland Yard conduct investigation against British citizens who have participated in Israel's war crimes in Gaza and the occupied territories. Finally, we call on the government to stop the criminalization of anti-genocide protests and deprescribe Palestine action. I urge you to read the report to see the full list of our demands. The bottom line is straightforward. If the goal is to end human suffering, then we must not only bring those who produce suffering to justice, but also hold those who enable them to account. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. And again, thanks to all those that contributed to this document in lots of ways. And thank you also to Laura Alvarez, who is the International Secretary for the Peace and Justice Project, for her work and support for this document as well. We've now got time for questions or discussion. I know Iqbal has to leave shortly to go. Apparently he's being tested by Ofsted today. That's a joke, Iqbal, it's all right. Did you want to ask a question or say anything? Because I know you have to leave early.
Thank you, Jeremy and panelists, and for convening the tribunal and for publishing this in-depth report. This is an activity that shouldn't have been required. It should have had the UK government investigating any and all breaches or potential breaches of international law by our allies and companies and citizens of this country. So ultimately, the question is, how can the findings of this report be acted on, and influence and persuade the government to take the findings of this report seriously and to take immediate action to start removing its complicity and its participation in the ongoing genocide? And then what further action can members like myself take in Parliament to make that?
Thank you for your question. The first thing I'm going to do this afternoon is present a copy of the report to the House of Commons Library. So it'll be there, and every MP will then have access to it, and it'll be officially recorded as doing that. How we take it forward? Who wants to go next?
Well, there are many things about how we take it forward, and I think it's a two-way thing. First of all, it is in the fact that this, what they would like this to happen is for this to go under the rug. For this to just never have happened, and those people were never killed, and that was absolutely fine. So a part of our job is to maintain the fact that, to maintain the necessity of an accountability mechanism in whichever form. On the larger scale, I think reckoning with reality is happening as we speak, because as we see the fact that when we say that Israel's actions pose a threat to international peace and security, what will happen is currently a threat to international peace and security. A whole region has been set ablaze. So I think also the most important, I think, urgent bit for taking this, at least on today, before tomorrow, is to urge the UK government not to get involved in this war and to stop any British involvement in support of the US and Israel in their illegal aggression, and to call things for their name. This is an illegal aggression. Any form of participation in it at any point is considered to be illegal. There's no buts, there's no ifs. Any movement by Israel and the US at the moment is a pure act of illegality, and we need to take this forward and challenge the government with it, and also challenge the legal advice that they have been getting. As international lawyers, we can tell you, international law is open for interpretation. And when you opt for narrow, fragmented readings of that discipline, what you do is you undermine the whole of the international legal system. And this is exactly what those legal advisors at the FCDO are doing. And they should be held accountable for that, or those who are forcing that must be held accountable. I apologize for not having concrete levels, but I'm hoping that overall strategy can guide then how we devise the tactics of engaging with government and taking this as urgent as possible.
I think it's important to know that the British government knew that it was acting illegally, because what came out in the testimonies, particularly from the whistleblowers, is that Keir Starmer and his government have instituted a culture of deception. And this culture of deception is a cover-up for illegal actions, particularly the ongoing trade of weapons with Israel as it was carrying out the genocide. And I think this is not going away because of the whistleblowers, because of the courageous people that came out from the inside and have exposed the government. I think there's still questions to be answered, and several ministers and officials will hopefully in the future be held accountable. We'll be presenting this evidence to the ICC, and they have to watch, and hopefully they will not do a repeat performance in this current war, illegal war against Iran and Lebanon.
Thank you. In addition to what I said earlier about presenting it to the library, we will also be sending copies to the current Foreign Secretary, Yvette Cooper, and the former Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, because they were both deeply involved in all of this. And we will be pursuing this thing all the time. And we hope to get a very wide circulation for this report and a wide media coverage. And indeed, I'll be discussing it in an interview I'm doing later tonight on Al Jazeera Arabic channel, raising many issues to do with that. I've got a number of media colleagues here. Hannah from Declassified. Hannah.
Thank you for this time as well. So again, you answered quite a few of our questions already, but I guess we also want to know how people feel, what people think this means for the Labour Party. Do you think it will kind of move forward as it is? Do you think it might be the end of the Labour Party as it stands? Yeah, what do you think other consequences of this tribunal could be? And who specifically do you think should be brought forward to the ICC, or who should be actually, within the media held accountable?
Who wants to go first on that one?
The Labour Party.
Well, I didn't quite hear the bit about the Labour Party. What it shows, first of all, thank you to Declassified for the work you do and the bravery with which you do it, because you help to inform when a lot of mainstream media don't inform. Thank you for that. I think what it is emblematic of what this government is about and what its whole process has been. In opposition, Labour failed to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. They then tried to get their way out of that by saying they really wanted to, but they couldn't. And then in government, they basically continued the Conservative policy. And it was more than a year in before they suspended any substantial number of arms supplies. But they have always maintained what is more important to Israel, actually, which is the security cooperation and the surveillance flights and the overflying of Gaza. That's actually much more important to Israel than the volume of arms that are provided. And so what it means for the Labour Party is that they have got to recognise that a Labour government has been complicit in wholly illegal activities in the bombardment and the acts of genocide against the people of Palestine. They've got to get real with this, and unless they're prepared to radically change their approach to international law, then what they've done is drag this country even further down the international order of condemnation of countries that fail to observe even the basic norms of international law. I'll be going to Parliament later on today because I'll be raising issues about our now very deep involvement in the war in Iran by the deployment of US forces from bases in this country to bomb targets in Iran. And the government cannot claim that somehow or other a bomber taking off from RAF Fairford, bombing targets in Iran and returning, is some kind of defensive action. It is nonsense. It is turning logic on its head. They have made Britain part of the war machine in Iran. Wouldn't it be good if we had a government that said, instead of supplying arms to every conflict, instead of all this, it said, our priority, our absolute priority, we will bend every sinew in our body to bring about peace, to bring about justice, to bring about recognition, to bring about hope for the people of Palestine, the people of Iran, the people of Ukraine, the people of any other country under conflict. That's what's so desperately sad about this time. A country that, our country, that did help to write the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, did help to write the Geneva Convention, did help to support and form the ICJ back in the 1920s, did support the ICC in the 1990s and 2000s. Now, we're part of the squad that is destroying international law and order, and thus consigning the lives of millions of Palestinians to desperation, poverty, and an early death. Okay, nothing to add. Hamish from the National.
I just wanted to ask you, firstly on the issue of Britain's involvement with the war in Iran. Obviously, Keir Starmer will say that Britain's operating in defensive capacity. Do you think that there's a risk of that escalating into offensive missions, or do you think that's already happened? And do you think that puts us at risk? And secondly, I just wanted to ask if you had gained any insight into the value of British security and intelligence sharing with Israel specifically. How does that aid US Israeli military operations in Gaza and further afield?
What the report shows very deeply is the involvement of British surveillance flights from RAF Akrotiri over Gaza. I don't know if you want to comment on that part.
So to start with the idea that Britain will only engage in defensive rather than offensive, there's nothing in law that really is capable of telling you when you start the defensive and enter the offensive in an illegal aggression. So you are particularly here defending your offshore assets, sorry, your outside assets, which is UK military bases. The question of whether or not Iran even hit them is a question, is open to question. But nevertheless, the fact that there is no line to be drawn, and it's interesting that Germany actually used a very similar argument when it tried to defend its arms exports to Israel during the genocide by saying that we only give defensive weapons and we only give non-lethal weapons. I've never heard of a non-lethal weapon, and I've never heard of a defensive weapon. The whole idea that we managed to normalize this concept that these are defense treaties or self-defense treaties, really the logic should be, and what Iran is demonstrating to the world, when you sign a defense treaty with Israel, and with the US, sorry, you also are signing an offensive treaty, and that cannot be said. What the UK is now doing is that it's signaling the legitimacy of an illegal occupation. We should not take these acts in absence of that. So rather than relying our foreign policy on a made-up differentiation that really in battle in an illegal aggression where there is no right of self-defense when you are engaging in an illegal aggression, then the question is really how much bad faith is this? And as I said, since the red line has been crossed, now we're very much okay with making nonsensible arguments. The coherence in the narrative of the British government has been completely, it's not like it was coherent before, but now we've reached a point where that coherence has crossed a line where there is no reference to the law. There is no reference to logic. It is just simply the fact that we are not signaling to the United States of America that our involvement in this is simply not acceptable. And not only that, the recklessness of, in law, we are held responsible for the recklessness of an act that you do if it's foreseeable that it will lead to complete disaster. And no one on earth can see any scenario where this is not a complete disaster, and a very, very foreseeable one with the knowledge that we currently have. If we are to, for a second, imagine further support to Israel and the US in this war, what it means. Regardless of what mainstream media would like to say, this is an illegal act of aggression that the purpose of it is to render Iran a failed state, full stop. It is not about nuclear weapons. It is not about them having missiles. It is about the fact that they want this to become another Iraq and another Syria. If this happens, we will have millions of refugees and the whole region will fall into further war. Israel will take the south of Lebanon as well as further parts of West Bank and Gaza. We will lose any capacity to protect the civilian population, and they will be under the rulership of a state that has just dropped leaflets on their head and told them, we'll make a Gaza out of you, haha, and the whole world is happy with us. So there is a lot of complicity, and there's zero level of capacity to justify the fact that we would enter this war and say that we are entering it in a defensive capacity. That is just illogical.
I can only add one thing, is that we see the deception that we witnessed during the tribunal mesticizing to Iran and Lebanon and the UK treatment with that. So you read in the morning a headline that Keir Starmer is sending minesweeping drones to Iran, and 2 hours later you you read a headline that the UK government is not going to intervene in Iran. Which one is true? We don't know. Okay, but what we know is that there's a culture of duplicity, a culture of deception, that he's lying to the public, he's lying to everyone around him, and we want the British government to be accountable. We don't think the British government should in any way be complicit with any of these illegal violent means, because it makes it complicit, and by association, it makes us complicit as taxpayers and as citizens of this country.
Thank you. Matt, your question. I've got two more, then I come to you, yeah? Matt.
So my question is also with regards to this report, how can everyday people take this report, utilize it, and hold people to account? And off the back of that as well, how can these actions be used to try to stop the British government from committing more war crimes by allowing the American bombers to land and go and kill civilians in Iran?
I think the growing opposition to the current conflict is highly significant. It certainly happened more quickly than it has in previous conflicts. I recall at the start of the Iraq War, I was very much opposed to it, but to begin with, there was a degree of public support for it. That disappeared after a few months, and later on, you can't find anybody who ever supported the Iraq War, apart from Tony Blair, who continues to support the Iraq War. And even when announcing the issues to do with Iran, Keir Starmer said, we've learnt the lessons of Iraq. Well, I don't think he has. I wished he had learned them, but I don't believe he has. But this is why we wanted the equivalent of a Chilcot-style inquiry into this. How do we take it forward? What we're doing today, the publicity we'll give it, the demands we'll make in Parliament, but above all, we're inviting everybody in the peace movement, in political organisations, in unions, to look at the report. It's all online. Take summaries of it, look at the executive summary. All the arguments are there, and use them to put demands on the political system in this country to be held to account. Otherwise, are we going to go forever down the road of Britain being the convenient ally that will always provide the weapons, provide the basis, and provide the political cover for the most disgraceful wars of aggression and the subjugation of the Palestinian people? That's what our report is designed to expose. I don't know if my colleagues want to add to anything on that.
I just wanted to say that this is a source for democratic governance, and what we're trying to do here is a very democratic exercise, in the sense that one of the primary premises of democratic governance is actually having the knowledge needed in order to do that. And the fact that, as Niamh kindly noted, that this is a culture of deception, what this report seeks to bring to the British people is a very clear image of how is it that our tax money, that our government here has managed to take itself to contribute to this crime. Of course, at the end of the day, this sheds a light on a historical complicity that specifically in this area, but all over the world, has happened in the name of the British public. And here I would say that never happened in the name of the British working class. It always happened in the name of the British elite rather than the British working class. And that really should be a really driving big question. Who profited of this? Who made money of this? And once we trace the trail of who is it that facilitated this, what type of foreign interests were used, were channeled across the UK Parliament, UK government, actually we have more hope of getting towards actual democratic engagement. As a teacher in this country, I can tell you that the teaching system in this country is really premised on making sure that people do not have political education. And it is very, very sad that we, in one of the most highly educated countries in the world, that we still do not have a culture of political awareness and discussion. So I think that such tools are important to popularize and to use. It's written in a very accessible light, and it's also written for the current moment as well as for history, to remind people of what is it that happened and how can we learn from these lessons. I would just add one very important note, which is while we proclaim the death of international law has happened in Gaza, we also know that this is the time to actually give birth to an interpretation and a reading of this law that entrenches its true meaning, the meaning that resonates with the majority of the world, the meaning behind which peace and security is premised on equality for all. So while this is also an attempt to give people the tools of how is it that we can use legal language to also go ahead in social movements, as well as revive that sense of justice into our social movements in order to build a much more justiciable world where we're all interconnected. So while that's not very concrete, but I think through engaging with this strongly, we can really build on the infrastructure of existing social movements that are engaging in England. And I'm sure that that spirit has grown a lot in the past 2 years. There's a lot more to do in terms of how we educate ourselves politically and go forward in our struggle, because the most important thing now is public consciousness.
Okay, thank you. Linda Pence-Gunter.
Yes, there are a lot of very, obviously, sorry, a lot of very damning and tragic conclusions in the report. But as you already mentioned, these are things that are still going on. So how will you use the report to try and overcome the perception now that Gaza is sort of over, there's a ceasefire, we've moved on to other focuses, including Iran, and yet these atrocities are ongoing. So is there a way to keep this as a sort of live document as well as a historical document to remind people that it's not behind us?
This, in my view, is a very significant report that we've prepared here, and it's taken quite a long time to prepare it. And I was very frustrated at the time it was taking to get it to the state it now is for publication, because I'm a generally impatient person because I want change. But there was a reason for that. The reason that every single argument in there is intellectually backed up, is intellectually sourced, is referenced. There is no dubiety about anything in this report. It's very, very clear. We have expert witnesses, including Francesca Albanese and many others that gave evidence. So this is, to me, the significance is equivalent to the Russell Tribunal about the war crimes in Vietnam. They were largely ignored until the Russell Tribunal came along. It didn't get massive publicity the day it happened, but as time went on, the Russell Tribunal became a reference point for the horrors of Vietnam and challenging the illegal nature of what was going on in Vietnam. So our report will be as widely circulated as we can muster. I'm very happy, and I want to arrange very shortly a big Zoom call when I hope my colleagues can join in on this, but we'll take questions from anybody who will join in on that. And the Peace and Justice Project conference in the early autumn will obviously have a substantial session on this and on the question of international law and what's happened in Gaza. So we build up the arguments all the time. This report is our weapon. It's our weapon for peace. It's our weapon for accountability. It's our weapon to make sure that the establishment in Britain understands we're watching them, and we're going to carry on watching them and carry on making those demands. I don't know if my colleagues want to add to that. Yeah.
I mean, the genocide in Gaza has turned into what I would call the slow motion stage. And in this slow motion stage, there's less media interest, there's less public interest, and so forth. And this report aims to begin countering that. Now, all three of us, even though Shahid and me are in law schools, do not really believe in the juridification of the struggle against what's going on. We believe that the juridification, which is the tribunal, is a tool for collective action. And what we're asking the public to do, each in their own way, and each where they live, is to create stories of resistance to what is going on and use this as a tool for creating these stories of resistance. And slowly these stories of resistance will connect together into this massive, massive resistance, and that will stop the genocide. If we don't do that, genocide will be normalized. Our mainstream legacy media has no problem with not putting it in the pages anymore and allowing it to continue. And we must ensure that that does not happen.
Thank you. I've got two questions. One about Turkey's attitude. The President of Turkey, Erdogan, said quite often the state of terror, or Netanyahu is a big terrorist. That's how he described Israel and Netanyahu. But in the same time, they continue to do the trade, even they increase the trade during this period. And also the part of the Hamas as well. What do you make on those kind of countries? What kind of condemnation you can do and we can do here in Britain? And also, one other questions about media attitudes. Last night, I think ABC had an interview with Iranian officials. One of the first questions she asked, are you targeting civilians? These kind of attitudes is hiding the Western imperialist massacres in the area. Do you think the media has a big role for these massacres?
Thanks, Arif. I think your point about Turkey, at one level, condemning what's going on and apparently supporting the Palestinian people, whilst at the same time maintaining trade and diplomatic relations, is symptomatic of a number of countries in the region and the double standards that always apply, where arms and particularly oil and supplies are concerned. The Israel war machine couldn't exist without the support of the USA, the complicity of Britain, but also the complicity of many other governments. And so the point you were just making about it is those that resist that's important. And I absolutely applaud those dock workers in Italy and other countries that refuse to handle anything to do with the weapons going to Israel. I absolutely support those brave people that went on the flotilla and those that are going on the next flotilla. Public opinion around the world is inspired by these people that do everything they can at great personal cost themselves out of a love for humanity. I don't know if you want to add anything on the Turkish point.
Just quickly, so when I said that the narrative is no longer capable of sustaining itself, nowhere is this more obvious than in Turkey, where they've upheld this very hypocritical position. But perhaps this is also a call that such tribunals must be also held as a tool of accountability in other jurisdictions, like Turkey, for example, where questions in relation to the BTC pipeline are still persistent on why on earth the BTC pipeline was working throughout the genocide and giving energy, despite the international legal obligations saying that you need to do everything within your own capacity, everything within your own leverage in order to stop the genocide. And that was an important part of their responsibility that they didn't adhere to. So perhaps, yeah, this is another, I'm just taking this opportunity to say that another way of taking this tribunal forward is to actually also take this model to other jurisdictions so that we'd be able to kind of highlight this. And another thing that I would say as well, that Francesca Albanese, the UN Rapporteur on occupied Palestinian territories, had published a report on state complicity in the genocide a few months ago that outlines a good part of that, but in very short terms. And now it's our duty to kind of keep it for history that we hold people's tribunals, and it's most apt to do so in an age of deception and an age when international law is being so overlooked.
Thank you. We've got time for a few more questions at the back, and then Claudia. Yeah.
I'm not sure if you can hear me. I'm seeing it out loud. I suppose I have two questions. The first is actually on Gaza itself. So like we're clearly moving into a period of renewed concentration camps and a much more curtailed and separated part of Palestinian land past the yellow line. And it's clear that that's going to be hyper surveillance. There's already talks of a cashless economy, monitoring how digital money, other tech kind of solutions to humanitarian relief, say nothing of self-governance or of accountability in any meaningful sense. So I'm just curious as to how this report and any ramifications from the report can actually tackle not just what has been, but also what might be coming. down the pipeline, because I feel like particularly with the revocation of the licenses for the aid organizations that happened on the cusp of the new year, there's clearly a targeted attack on any kind of infrastructure that supports or enables Palestinian life to continue in some form. And instead, I think there's going to be this hyper-surveillance, technical or technological response to the pressing needs of people who have survived or are surviving genocide. So that's just one question, the link between the report and what might be coming down the pipeline. The second question is perhaps more of a comment, but any reflection would also be appreciated. I have really valued and thought the evocation of Britain's historical complicity in Palestine and beyond the genocide is a really important contribution, both to the report and to the remarks here today. But it's all in my head, the question I had. Never mind, if it comes back, I'll raise it. Oh, sorry, no, just on this question of separating, or rather working to dilute Israel from the actions of the Western governments, particularly the US and the UK. I think there's somewhat of a tendency to act as if Israel is a rogue state, or somehow Britain has some kind of obligation that's rooted in a state-to-state relationship as opposed to an imperial relation whereby Israel was created with the support, as we know, of the British government that's spoken out against civilization against barbarism, and all of Israel's actions seem to be in line with ensuring an imperial relationship between the Arab world or the wider region and Western powers. And so I think I'm just curious the extent to which this report is situated within those discourses of broad historical legacies, as opposed to Britain having some kind of checks and balances or having some kind of mediated relationship with the Israeli state.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm going to try to address your second question, and I think the whole report goes against that trend of separating Israel as if it's a lone actor. The whole idea here is that without the complicity, without the diplomatic assistance, without the arms trade, without all the different forms of assistance that we reveal here, and Britain is only one country of many, probably with the the largest history in this kind of complicity, but certainly not the main actor today. The United States is. But what we're assuming here from the very beginning is that Israel could not do it alone, and that it needed the British government, it needs the German government, it needs the American government, the United States government to carry out these acts. And if we manage to create a wedge between Israel and, let's say, the UK government, it will reduce Israel's powers to carry out these kinds of crimes, both in Gaza, but in the occupied territories and throughout the Middle East. So the very idea of this whole tribunal is not to expose Israel's crime alone, but to expose the relation between the UK government and Israel's crime. So I think the whole idea of this tribunal is exactly to answer this kind of lacuna that you're describing.
Sure.
Thank you for bringing this in, and it is indeed the reality that the U.S. is trying to paint for Palestine is not just a grim one, but perhaps someone watched far too many dystopian films and quite obsessed with getting them forward in the tech industry, in the tech type of imagination for the future of Gaza, as well as the fact that businessmen have taken it over and looking at Gaza as a business opportunity. The imagination of the so-called Board of Peace is simply the imagination of the so-called, it's exactly it's exactly the US telling us that we have killed international law, and now we are creating this new alliance simply of all the states that agree with our systems of value, and that is the system of submission. So this report its reading of international law is steeped in the concept of the right of self-determination. Herein, from this reading of international law, nothing of the premises of the Board of Peace would be considered legitimate, in the sense that the Board of Peace was coercively imposed on the Palestinian people and seeks to normalize and new form of occupation. And that new form of occupation is even worse, and I would say more sick, more sadistic than the prior one. There are simply no words to describe it. How is it that this would bring us back to the reality on the ground and what is happening? Again, we are trying to, I would say that the narrative on which the Board of Peace rests is a weak narrative. And it doesn't have a premise of legitimation unless you use the weapons and unless you use arms. So popularizing narratives like the one in this report actually helps people get more tools to make this economically unfeasible project. And it will be economically unfeasible if the people protest it, and if the people don't allow it to happen, this dystopian project. So, and as to situating it within the historical, I would take it further and not say that it's just simply that Britain is complicit in the creation of Israel. Actually, there is a very clear pattern here that Israel itself was created in pursuit of these interests in the region, and so it's not that simply this happened and the UK supported it. Actually, this happened to facilitate what then turned out to be the most, the bloodiest chapter of the region, where my own generation had to live for 5 generations of blood and gore, and all of it, a lot of it traces back to the fragmentation that Israel has shown in the region. So, and it's indeed, that narrative is something that I think the genocide has put on the table, and I think has made it clear to millions of people who otherwise lived in or saw or believed another narrative. We're closer to bringing in the true narrative to the minds of people, and we should push further towards them.
Thank you. Just to remind you, Sam's just sent me a message to just remind me to say, Sam Squeak, who's over there, that the Peace and Justice Project will be sending a message to all of our 60,000 supporters with a very easy tool for them to write to their own MP with a full copy of the report as an addition to their email they're sending, as a way of continuing that pressure. As I said, we'll also be organising some big Zoom events on this and big discussions on this, because this report has taken a huge amount of work and effort by a relatively small number of people. That work must not go in vain. That work has to be spread around a lot. Thanks for that, Sam. Claudia, you had a question. Claudia Webb, former MP for Leicester East.
Okay, thank you. I mean, this Gaza Tribunal Report is significant, it is powerful, it is groundbreaking. It's all of those things. The central output that it comes to, that the British government was complicit in Israel's genocide of Gaza, is hugely significant. The evidence outlined in the report is clear. F-35 bombs, 660 spy planes, 160,000 military goods. The issue that I have is the notion of the British government investigating itself or looking at it itself. The confidence that the public will have on this wouldn't be there. That's why what the report leans to in terms of a movement, in terms of civil society taking action, and indeed the questions that have been put here about what more can we do to enable civil society, civilians, to put a case to the ICC to investigate, stop Lamy for their complicity in the genocide, for their actions, and what more we can do. And as we talk about a tool, I think, go further, create the tool that enables the individual, the civilian, to make their case to the ICC, to investigate Britain's complicity. And every minister that signed the licenses ought to be investigated. And that requires action. And I remember when I was in Parliament, Jeremy, before the ICC investigated Benjamin Netanyahu, me and you, we actually wrote to the ICC. I don't know if you remember. Not only did we have to write, but we handed over a copy of our passport to the ICC to say, we want this to be investigated. And they duly investigated along with other people that also put in the case. So I think that civilians will benefit from being able to make their case to the ICC. The evidence is contained in this report.
Very powerful point, Claudia. Thank you very much. Yes, we will obviously ask our supporters and everybody else to pressurise MPs on it, but you're quite right. We are not demanding the government investigate itself. My point in my bill was an independent parliamentary investigation in it, or a judge-led inquiry, as there was with Chilcot kind of principle. But you're quite right. It is a question about complicity and reference to the judicial authorities, being the ICJ and the ICC. I don't know if either want to add to that particular point. No. Okay, any other questions? Okay, could I then conclude the event here in exactly 1 hour? How's that for efficiency and timekeeping? Thank you very, very much, everyone, for coming. Thank you for the work you put into this report. If this report achieves anything, it's to raise consciousness, it's to do something about the desperate situation of the people of Gaza and increasingly the West Bank, and the wars that are going on now in southern Lebanon, Iran, and elsewhere. This is a plea that those that are held responsible for the supply of weapons, for the bombardment, for the genocide, for the starvation, for the war crimes, are actually held to account. Held to account. It won't bring back the 71,000 who are dead. It won't stop the mental health disaster that is going to befall the people of Palestine for decades and decades to come. But it might just do something to stop or pause or prevent the next round of politicians doing exactly the same somewhere else. It is about holding to account those that make what they think are the easy, popular decisions to send weapons, to send bombs, knowing full well the people who die are the children, the places that are bombed are the schools and the hospitals and the homes and the roads and the sewage treatment plants and all the rest of it. I think it's a disgrace that in the 21st century, we're watching on live television war crimes being committed by the hour. Our report is designed to at least, for the Gaza Tribunal, hold those responsible for what they've done to the people of Gaza, and we won't rest until they are held responsible. Thank you very much all for your attendance today.